So I'd like to discuss is really to get at, I wouldn't say necessarily the heart of Yom Kippur. There might be the heart of Yom Kippur, or at least a vital organ. Whether it's the heart or the liver, I don't know. But it's it's part of the idea of Yom Kippur that without it, we really can't discuss at all what we're going to be Bezrat Hashem experiencing in a few days' time. And that's the aspect of Shabbaton. Before we get to in the order of the Mekorot here, but let's take a look at number 3 first, just to let you understand what I mean by this, because this is the way that the Torah presents it in the second time. The first time the Torah presents Avodat Yom Kippur. The first time what we're going to be actually reading on Monday morning at Kriyat Torah is from Parshat Achremot, which describes in detail the specific avodah, the korbanot of the Yom, what the Kohen Gadol was doing, and that is certainly, that's why I said maybe that's the heart. It's hard to know, but for us, in terms of our practice, beyond what we do in shul, in terms of the tefillot, that litzarenu we don't have the avodah in the mikdash. So for us, in terms of our practice, really the core of Yom Kippur is not what's described in Parshat Achremot, but rather what's described in Parshat Emor, in the parsha of the Moadot, the parsha of the various Yamim Tovim. And here the Torah tells us the following. It's it's number 3 on the source sheet. In Perek Chav Gimel of Vayikra, Ach be'esor l'chodesh hashvi hazeh Yom Kippurim hu mikra kodesh yeh lachem. So it's a day which is, we'll leave aside right now what the term mikra kodesh means, but it is a common phrase with regard to all of the holidays, we'll say, but literally a day of calling out of the Kedusha. There's machloket amongst the different parshanim as to how to understand that phrase, but that's not what we're focusing on today. V'initem et nafshotechem, and you shall afflict yourselves, v'hikravtem mishel Hashem, and bring the korban to God. So what happens here? Now, take a look at this. Is what I put into bold, because and maybe I should have put it into different colors just so it becomes a little bit more highlighted. But I think you'll get it from this as well. Chol melacha lo ta'asu be'etzem hayom hazeh. In other words, how am I defining this mikra kodesh? So the Torah has already added the unique aspect of Yom Kippur, which does not exist for any of the other Yomim Tovim, and that's the v'initem, that you should be afflicting yourselves. And so now, within that context, we have the Chol Malacha Lo Ta'asu Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh Ki Yom Kippurim Hu L'chaper Alechem L'fnei Hashem Elokechem. So, as part of that, no malacha is going to be permitted, and we'll touch upon this in a moment, but that beyond what happens on Yom Tov, when on Yom Tov you have the heter of ochel nefesh. Here you presumably don't have that, and the distinction, because to use what the Ramban already points out, is that the Torah, whenever it talks about Yom Tov, so the Torah talks about melechet avodah. That's the term that's used, and as opposed to kol melacha. Melechet avodah is the melacha which is done, if you will, outside of the kitchen, and outside of food preparation. That's melechet avodah. Kol melacha includes what we would have, what we need in order to prepare food. But we'll come back to that hopefully. Be'etzem hayom hazeh, in the midst of this day, ki Yom Kippurim hu, it's a day of atonement in order to atone for you before Hashem. Ki chol hanefesh, now in Pasuk Chavtet, chol hanefesh asher lo tu'uneh. In other words, note the the back and forth, right? We started with the Initem et nafshotechem, and then we went to Chol Melacha Lo Ta'asu, and now the Torah goes back to the Initem. Chol HaNefesh Asher Lo Tu'uneh Be'etzem HaYom Hazeh V'nichreta Me'ameha. Right? So then if you don't afflict yourself, we'll say for the moment you don't fast, so then the penalty for that is karet. V'chol hanefesh asher ta'aseh kol melacha. In other words, it's the back and forth here, right? We had the initem, lo melacha lo ta'asu. Now, what are the ramifications? If you don't fast, so it's karet, and then if you do melacha, so it's again kol nefesh asher ta'aseh melacha be'etzem hayozeh v'havati ad nefesh hahi mikerav hama. Doesn't talk about karet specifically, but Chazal understood that term v'ha'avati to be to mean karet. Then we go back to the melacha. Kol melacha lo ta'asu chukat olam dorotechem b'chol mashvatechem. Or we continue, and now Shabbat Shabbaton hu lachem. It is a day, and this is the only 2 days that are ever called Shabbat Shabbaton, is with regard to Yom Kippur and Shabbat itself. So you have Shabbat Shabbaton, and it's v'initem et nafshotechem. Then you shall again afflict yourself. So if you have you have 3 times where where melacha is mentioned, 3 times where the fasting is mentioned, and here the Torah adds, if we have time, we'll talk about this very briefly. B'tish'ad lachodesh ba'erev me'erev ad erev tishbetu shabbatchem. I mean, the pasuk had begun, the parsha had begun in pasuk Chav Zayin, ach be'esor lachodesh, on the 10th of the month. And now, just 5 psukim later, the Torah is talking about the 9th ba'erev. Mi'erev ad erev tishbetu shabbatchem, and again you have that term of Shabbat, which is being used here. Now, if I'm just looking at these psukim, so then it's clear what the Torah is putting this very strong emphasis on the if you will, the bipolar aspect of the holiday. On the one hand, you have the Innui, and on the other hand, you have the Isur Melacha as defining the nature of the holiday. Again, just looking at in terms of the psukim. So that's really what I want to focus on today, is to try to understand more the issue of the Innui, but we'll also touch upon the issue of the Melacha, to understand what is at the heart of this aspect, or these aspects of Yom Kippur. And the Torah, just to make it very clear, and I should have put this in bold, I apologize, the last 2 words, the Tishbetu Shabbatchem, that Shabbaton, which had come up again and again, the idea of the Tishbetu Shabbatchem, Shabbat Shabbaton hi lachem, etc. This is the idea of Yom Kippur. So you have, if you will, 2 specific aspects, Melacha and Innui, bundled up into this concept of Shabbat. So now what is Shabbat? It seems to be a question that we don't need to ask, but I'll ask it. What would I say that? What do we say the day is Shabbat? What do we mean by that?
A day of rest.
A day of rest. Okay. Oneg Shabbat. Any other ideas? I'm sorry? Time specific. Okay. So we have something which is specific to a certain time with, just to use everything that people have said, day of rest and Oneg Shabbat.
It's a creation of the natural order of the world.
Creation of the natural order of the world. How would that work with Shabbat in terms of Yom Kippur?
I don't know.
Okay. You said, huh?
Day of rest.
A day of rest. Okay, so let's take a look at,
No school.
Sorry?
The kids, they don't go to school.
No school. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so that I take away from the Shabbat for the parents. Right? But so let's try to understand. Right? Okay. So this is actually an issue that, well, already Chazal tried to grapple with, but the one I think who most famously deals with it and deals with it at length, and he actually returned to it several times. Already, the first time that he dealt with it was when he was a teenager. I'm talking about the Ramban, when he wrote his commentary or his defense of the Rif against the attack of the Baal Hamor. The Baal Hamor was this is nothing to do with the shir, but it's a good story. The Baal Hamor was 19. Right, Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi from Provence in the 12th century, and he wrote glosses on the Rif. Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi, who had written up to that point the primary halachic guide. He wrote it based on his understanding of the Gemarot. He wrote it in order of the Gemarot, and he basically took out the shitot, more complex than this. But basically, the way he passed it, how you know, is you take a look at, you read through the Rif, it goes in the order of the Gemara, and the parts that he doesn't paskin like, he takes out. So it's sort of a condensed Gemara version. There's more to it than that, but it was the authoritative code of the time, certainly in the world of Sfarad. And the Baal Hamor, who was a young man, who was, I think, about 19 or so, so he wrote his glosses to the Rif, in which he took the Rif to task, sometimes, quite strongly, when he felt it was necessary. He already his contemporary, who was the Ravid, wrote an attack or a defense of the Rif, which he called, which is known as the Katuv Sham, because each paragraph begins Katuv Sham be Baal Hamor, this, that, the other, and this is why he's wrong. Okay, fine. But the Ramban, who's a generation after, so he wrote a work called the Milchamot Hashem, right? The battles of God, the wars of God, the holy war against the Baal Hamor, and he writes in the introduction, what kind of chutzpah it is that this young man, 19-year-old, right, would take on the Rif. The only thing is the Ramban was 14 when he wrote it. Okay. But anyway, so he already, when he was a young teenager, so he already dealt with this issue. He again deals with it in his commentary to the, I know of 3 places. Again dealt with it in the commentary to the Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam, and he discusses it. And then he discusses a third time, which is the one which is the most well known, is in his Perush al Torah. And the Perush al Torah was something that the Ramban wrote when he was already in his, he finished it when he was in his 70s. So it's something which he was for about 60 years or so of his life, was something that he was engaged in. And looking at different nuances, you could see certain nuances that come in from the different versions, but it's basically the same idea. So the Ramban here in his Perush to Vayikra, so he says the following. It's on pasuk not with regard to Yom Kippur, it's with regard to Rosh Hashanah, right before. So the Torah there had said, "Daber b'nei Yisrael le'mor b'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad l'chodesh yeh lachem Shabbaton zichron trua." So there the term Shabbaton appears, and it's the first time that it appears in that parsha, which is why the Ramban talks about it there. And he discusses, Yeh lachem Shabbaton, what does it mean? Yeh lachem Shabbaton. So he says, the first explanation, Yom Shvita lanuach ba. This is source number 2. Yom Shvita lanuach ba. It should be a day of rest. Right? Basically what people had said here. V'amru avotenu Shabbaton asehu. So now he quotes a Gemara where the Gemara said that this idea of Shabbaton is a mitzvah aseh. V'hinei ha'oseh melacha biyom tov over bilav v'aseh v'hashovet bo mikayem aseh. We don't think necessarily in this way, but this is the way the halacha appears. That if you do malacha on Shabbat, if you do melacha on Yom Tov, so then you violated the Isur of Kol Melacha Lo Ta'aseh. Fine. But in addition, you have violated the positive concept of resting. You're supposed to rest on Shabbat. By doing melacha, so then you are not resting. Okay, so if I were to leave it at this, so then basically all that it would be is that, okay, you have other examples where you have a mitzvah aseh and a mitzvah lo taseh. And if I violate the lo taseh, I'm also violating the aseh. It's sort of the yin and the yang. Okay, but it would be that how do I not fulfill the mitzvah of Shabbat, the positive mitzvah of Shabbat? I would not fulfill it by doing the melacha, which also by definition is a lo taseh. Right? At this point, that's where we're up to. Va'al da'atam, he says, Hamoadot kulam hukshu zelazeh, ki lo de'emar Shabbaton b'chag hamatzot v'lo ba'atzeret. The term Shabbaton never appears with regard to Pesach, never regards with regard to Shavuot, but basically all the Yamim Tovim are one corpus, and that has its idea of Shabbaton. Shabbat has its own, and we move forward. Okay. So now he continues and he brings a midrash halacha. So I see a very early a midrash, both early in terms of its placement. It's in Sefer Shemot. It's also one of the earliest midrashim that we have. Midrash halacha dating back to the time of the Tanaim. So in the very first parsha of Yom Tov, in the Parshat HaChodesh, where HaKodesh Hazeh Lachem, where Pesach is introduced, but they're still in Egypt, the Torah says, Ushmartem et hayom hazeh, lama ne'emar, v'lo kvar ne'emar kol melacha lo yaseh bahem. Why, what does it mean that you should keep this day, when it's already, or watch this day, when it's already been said that you shouldn't do melacha? Ein li al dvarim shehem mishum melacha, dvarim shehem mishum shvut minayon. How do I know, the Medrash says, that Yom Tov, again, it's talking about Pesach there, the first Pesach. How do I know that Yom Tov doesn't only mean not doing melacha, but it also means shvut, without defining shvut yet. Shvut, rest. So here that there's this additional idea, not only the idea of melacha, but also this positive concept of rest, and that's learned from the pasuk Talmud Lomar Ushmartem et hayom hazeh lahavi dvarim shehem mishum shvut. Okay, then it goes into Chol HaMoed, etc. Fine, we'll leave that aside right now. And this is what the Ramban says. This idea of Ushmartem, what the Mechilta talks about, is the equivalent of Shabbaton that the Torah will use later on in Vayikra. But then he says the following, the next paragraph, the bold. Avalonit barely, I don't understand this. She'im tomar shehu asmachta. Because what does it mean if I'm not doing melacha? What am I doing exactly? So he says maybe this it's what we would call the isurei d'Rabbanan, the rabbinic violations of Shabbat, the rabbinic violations of Yom Tov. Muktzah along the lines, or doing things that are not asur from a Torah perspective, but the rabbis introduced it in order to, if you will, to protect as making a fence around those malachot. But he says, what does that mean? Then ma tamnom she'omru b'lashon kishvut b'lashonam ne'emar la'olam al shel divreihem. If you take a look in the Gemara, it says universally, every single time, when the Gemara talks about an Isur Shvut, it refers to a rabbinic. Rabbinic did. So now the Ramban saying, but there's a disconnect, because here we're talking about at the Torah level. We're talking about a real drasha. And now you're telling me, well, it's a rabbinic din, but if it's rabbinic, then it shouldn't have a drasha. It's rabbinic, right? So it doesn't work. So how does he understand it? V'nira li, this is the third line there in the bold, in the middle. Shamidrash hazeh lomar shenitztavinu min haTorah liyot lanu menucha biyom tov, afilu b'dvarim she'einan melacha. So there is a mitzvah min haTorah to rest and desist from activities, even if they're not technically called malacha. Lo shiyitrach, and he gives an example. And in this, you get a beautiful picture, if you ever wanted a beautiful picture, of a medieval marketplace. Because he's describing what he sees in the streets of Barcelona. Lo shiyitrach kol hayom limdod hatfuot v'lishkol haperot v'hamatanot u'lemalei chaviyot yayin. You shouldn't be involved all day long measuring, weighing grain and fruit and other goods and filling barrels with wine u'lefanot hakelim and moving various heavy goods. V'gam ha'avanim mibayit l'mabayit u'mimakom l'makom, from one house to the other, even stones from one place to another, etc. V'im ha'ayta ir mukefet chuma u'dlatot nu'ulot balayla. If you have a walled city and the walled city's gates are closed at night, what we would call an eruv, yiyu omsim al hachamorim va'af yayin va'anavim v'te'enim v'chol masay yaviu biyom tov. So they would, then you can load up the donkeys, bring all the wine, bring all your fruits, your grapes, your figs, and all other goods. You'll bring it on Yom Tov. The marketplace will be full for all kinds of commercial activity. The stores will be open. And the storekeeper will keep credit. Right? I mean, basically, going back to, or how do you play Scrabble on Shabbos? Right? The bookmark, right? Right? How do they manage to have, right, the Yom Kippur appeal? Right? So, right, you're not going to get away with just simply saying malacha. We'll figure out a way to give you the cards and you fold over the tab. So, okay, so you can do that in the stores. Baruch Hashem, Torah is given to Jews. We know how to take care of these issues. That's not a problem, right? So we're not going to do any malacha. So fine. And the money changers will be at their stations. The gold will be in front of them. The workers will be getting up for their malacha. And they can hire themselves out. The workers can hire themselves out from the very beginning of the day. Hutru hayamim hatovim ha'elu va'afilu v'shabbat hazeh v'shabbat atzma shebechol zeh ein behem mishum malacha. Basically, you can drain everything, all the activity the Ramban just described. There isn't a single Isser D'Oraita that was done. Because malacha, the definition of malacha isn't work. Malacha, the definition of malacha is, it's a different shiur, but is creative activity. All of the malachot, all the 39 activities, you're changing something. And that is what's considered malacha on Shabbat. Work itself, schlepping things, working hard, etc., that doesn't fall into the category of malacha. So it's a giant loophole that, as I said, that Jews can figure out. Right? That's not so hard to figure out. Right? So if you want to keep your, you'll have a tzomet hashgacha for, not chas v'shalom denigrating tzomet, but you get a hashgacha, you pick your badats, it doesn't matter. They'll all give you the hashgacha for how you're going to work your marketplace on Shabbat, and basically you won't have Shabbat as a result. So this, the Torah says, Lekach Amrat Torah. It's not Rabbanan who say this. It's the Torah itself, who in one word sums it up. Shabbaton. Sheyeh Yom Shvita U'Menucha Lo Yom Torah. The day should be a day of rest and not a day of work. That is, in other words, the Rabban would say that and this is also another shiur. We'll leave it for another time. But the idea, what people call, it's not Shabbostic, right? Which people understand it as being, what does it mean it's not Shabbostic? Right? Not the spirit of Shabbos. It's what the rabbi has to say when he doesn't have what to say. Okay? So he wants to say, okay, you can't play tennis. Why can't you play tennis? It's not Shabbostic. Right? Right? You don't have or Yom Tov Day, whatever it is. So you don't have an answer, so you make up a term, Shabbos Day. The Ramban would say, no. That, I'm not saying the application, each application, that's another discussion, but the concept, that's what the Torah means by Shabbaton. And that's the most basic aspect of Shabbat. It's the most basic aspect of Yom Tov. It has to be qualitatively a day of rest. And that qualitative day of rest isn't defined by, or only defined by the melachot. It could, obviously, if you go ahead and you plow a field, so you're violating Shabbaton as well. But that's not the only way to go about violating Shabbaton. You can miss the whole purpose of Shabbaton by not by plowing the field, but by doing all the activities that the Ramban talks about. And so the Torah wants to close that loophole. And the way the Torah closes the loophole is by saying, this is the concept, this is Shabbaton. Right? And understand that. And we also have the melachot. Now you can understand, it's the moving forward, I'm not going to read the whole Ramban right now, but he says this is what the Chachamim did. Now the Chachamim, when they make their gezerot, they're working on this field of Shabbaton. Whereas if you're doing, I'll just give an example, right? If you take, let's say, an Issur D'Rabbanan on Shabbat, to reheat food on an open flame. So there's no melacha of reheating food. Ein bishul achar bishul. We said, language also, it's not cooking. You don't say you're re-cooking something. You're reheating something. So it's not melacha. Cooking is something which is creative. It's taking raw materials and turning it into cooked food, chemical change, etc., etc. That is melacha. Reheating isn't melacha. Right? It's just reheating. But the Chachamim said, I can't take a pot of food, put it onto an open flame on Shabbat morning, and reheat it, because it mechze kebishul. It looks like bishul. It's the same pot, same weight, same heft. I put it on the flame, exact same activity. In terms of my activity, right? From the food's perspective, it's different, but from my perspective, it's identical. So that's Asher B'D'Rabbanan. So that's what the Torah, what the Chachamim call that is an Isur Shvut. That's something which is forbidden because you're violating the spirit of the day by doing that. You're doing something that is too close to melacha. And there are literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of examples that you could say. But what the Chachamim are saying is that I have something which is very broad, rest. It might even be very subjective. And so now we have to put certain guidelines because different people can say, oh, well, I love tinkering in the kitchen. This is my rest. Right? So I'm going to do it. Right? So the Chachamim say, okay, no, this is what we think is rest, etc. Right? And as I said, this is what, that other shiur is to try to understand how to apply these concepts, not in the 13th century marketplace that the Ramban was talking about, but in the 21st century, in terms of our lives, how do you apply Shvut in modern day and with our technologies? And that's a different discussion, but a very important discussion. But that is what the Ramban is getting at in terms of the word Shabbaton. The Torah tells you the concept, the Chachamim fill in some of the details, but you have to understand the concept. So if I can, but the key core concept here is that there is a nature of the day, Shabbaton, nature of the day, and that's being defined very broadly, and with examples that the Torah gives in terms of actually doing melacha as well, in the case of Yom Tov. Yeah?
So what does he say about pull-down tabs?
I'm sorry?
What does he say about those pull-down tab cards?
Okay. So, okay, so you can see that what the I don't know what the rabbis say. I know what shul presidents say about this. It's how that's been defined. Okay, but you're right. Now you have to start asking the question. So is that appropriate? Is that not appropriate? But on a more serious level, the the consensus has become, because of dealing with Dvar Mitzvah, Tzedakah, whatever the appeal is for, right? So that is something which is appropriate for the day. You could argue, definitely argue the concept, and but that's part of it. So, why do I bring this up here? Because again, remember, the Torah uses Shabbaton. Here, the Torah used Shabbaton with regard to Yom Kippur as well. And with regard to Yom Kippur, the Torah had not just used Shabbaton with regard to Melacha, which the Torah had used it with reference to in the earlier case of Rosh Hashanah. But here the Torah has also introduced a new concept. It's also introduced the concept of V'initem et nafshotechem, and you will now afflict yourselves. Yeah.
You're still used the word oneg. Is that
correct?
Beyond the purview of this?
So it might not include. It might include the idea of oneg. The concept of oneg itself only appears in the Nevi'im, in Yeshayahu. It could be that Yeshayahu is expanding the idea of Shabbaton to include that aspect as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now this is something that the Ramban said. The Ramban is the one who develops it very clearly. This is something else that the Ramban does in other areas. Probably the most famous example is what the Ramban does with Kedoshim Tehiyah. It's the same concept that the Ramban does. In other words, the Ramban says, what is Kedoshim to you? Shelo yeh naval b'rshut haTorah. That you should not be someone who is reprehensible with Torah license. That is the idea of Kedoshim to you. But the Ramban says, what does the Torah do? The Torah gives me a whole list of other of different activities or different things that I'm not allowed to do. And the Torah knows that you can have a book of statutes from here till tomorrow. It doesn't matter. You can always find something else. So the Torah doesn't give you every single idea that is going to that is, if you will, forbidden. The Torah then, after, gives you all of these different examples. Let's say kashrut or the dinim of arayot, right, of sexual relations and all of that. The Torah says, "Kedoshim to you, be holy." And so that idea, the Ramban says, is saying, take all of those examples and then apply it to the way you're supposed to act. In general, even if there isn't a specific isur, right? That gluttony shouldn't become gluttony, okay, if you will. That is the idea of the Ramban, but it's the same concept, the same play that the Ramban is doing here. He's saying, the Torah is not going to tell you everything that's inappropriate on Shabbat. It's not going to tell you everything that's inappropriate on Yom Tov. It says the word Shabbaton, and it gives you enough examples, you get the picture. Figure it out yourself. Right? He does it also in with regard to Ben Adam L'Chavero and the V'asita hayashar v'hatov b'einei Hashem Elokecha. The Torah says, do what's right, do what's just, because you've already had all of these examples of starting with lo tignov and lo tirtzach and going down the list. So then, also in those areas, how to be a mensch, if you will. Right? V'asita yashar v'hatov. The Ramban says it there as well. This is the idea that the Ramban develops in different places. So what happens now with with Yom Kippur? So let's see, with this concept in mind, things that predate the Ramban begin to make a little more sense. So, for example, number 4, the Gemara says the following: Tanu Rabba v'Rav Yosef b'shar sifrei debrei Rav. So Rabba and Rav Yosef, the Amoraim, taught they taught the different Sfarim of the Beit Midrash of Rav. Minayin liyom haKippurim she'asur b'rechitza b'sicha nilat hasandal tashmish hamita. We know that initem et nafshotechem, the Gemara has explained that term Innui, to that deprivation, that affliction, that refers to eating and drinking. What about everything else that we know are forbidden on, that we've been taught from day one, are forbidden to us on Yom Kippur? Bathing, anointing oneself, wearing shoes, sexual relations. Talmud lomar, Shabbaton, Shvut. Right? disconnect?
Yeah.
Right? Where did that come from? Right? Okay, it said shvut. Okay, that means rest, oneg, which is against Innui, and everything else that was said. But now, based on this Ramban, you can understand the concept. Because what the Gemara is saying is Shabbaton doesn't mean rest. Shabbaton means the core, it also means rest. It take the value of that day and apply it appropriately. So when it comes to Shabbat, when it comes to your normal Yom Tov, so that includes the dinim of enjoying yourself, of oneg, of simcha. On Yom Kippur, the Torah, again and again and again, 3 times, stressed within the concept of the presentation of the day, it stressed the idea of Innui. V'initem et nafshochem. V'chol nefesh asher lo tu'uneh. So it's not something which is separate or a separate component of the day. It is core concept of the day. The Shabbat of Yom Kippur is partially, or even primarily, at least 50%, is the idea of suffering, of affliction, of initem. So I take the basic idea of fasting, but I expand it to other physical pleasures. Now, how far do I take it? Right? Do I say, well, maybe I should, put stones in my sneakers because I can't wear shoes? So I'll put stones in them, or I'll have a bed of nails that I'll lie on, right? So theoretically, maybe, you could go that. But here, Chazal are saying that this is what the Torah means. These are the basic pleasures that a person should be refraining from on Yom Kippur as an expanded v'initem. Right, but it's part of Shabbaton, because the Shabbaton means what is the theme of the day? What's the motif? That's what Shabbaton is meant. And so the motif of Yom Kippur is v'initem, and so therefore we now, the same way that we could talk about Isurei D'Rabbanan. And there's a question whether these activities, by the way, are D'Rabbanan or they're D'Oraita. And we pass it that they're D'Oraita, but they don't have the same Isur Karet, by the way. Whereas if someone takes a shower on Yom Kippur, so it's violating the notion of the initem, but it doesn't have the karet, which is attached to the penalty for eating on Yom Kippur. So it is an expanded the initem, but that's part of Shabbaton. And Rashi says this explicitly. Number 5, Gabe Innui Ktiv. Shabbaton, this is his explanation. V'chihechi de Shabbaton amor b'Shabbat isbuchu be'Rabbanan shar melachot shelo hayu b'Mishkan. The same way that the Chachamim expanded the notion of melacha on Shabbat, so too hainami Shabbaton degabe Innui. So this is the Shabbaton of Innui. We expand the concept of the initem. Okay, fine. So let's take a look at what this means in practice. Okay, beyond, if you will, those 4 Isurim. Yeah.
This is surprising in a way, isn't it? Because don't we usually have a concept that self-inflicted pain is not something that in Judaism is encouraged, and denying yourself pleasures is a denial of what Hashem has given us in relation to the
Okay.
That's one. And the second thing is that this is a day specifically when we're entreating God to be favourable towards us, and our usual approach is that you get credit, as it were, with Hashem, not by doing negative things, but by doing positive things. And it seems to therefore to go against the flow of our usual approach.
Okay. So maybe I should have gone this way before I didn't, but now I'm glad you brought that up. What do all of these Innuyim, the expanded list, have in common? So they don't have flagellation. In other words, there isn't any I said, well, maybe you should lie on a bed of nails. Maybe you should put stones in your shoes, right? You could start, start hitting yourself, etc., whipping yourself, whatever it might be, or whipping, even better, whipping the person next to you. But that, right? That would give you too much hana. But the point, though, is that is but none of that is included in the list. Everything in this list is refraining from something. It's denial. And that's what initem and nafshatechem is. And you can expand it in terms of the notion, which is the idea of being angelic, of being outside of this world, etc. For one day, right? That it's important to take a step back and not to be as much as possible, not to be a physical being. But it does not include actively causing pain, right? Which has been found in other, certainly in other religious traditions, and even has a place to a certain extent in Judaism as a punishment. In other words, when it's fallen out of favor, certainly not part of our mind thing, but in the Middle Ages, it was very common for if you wanted to do penance, as it were, you wanted to do you did an Aveira, so there was a whole list of things that people would say, okay, if the penalty for this is, in the Torah, is Malkot, so what is an equivalent of Malkot that you should do to yourself for having eaten the cheeseburger? Okay, in other words, but that's for punishment purposes. But in terms of on a positive religious path, right? So we're not adding pain here. We are denying ourselves, and this would answer your second question as well. Whereas, why are we using this as if you will, a vehicle for kapara and a vehicle to find favor, hopefully in the Ribbon Shalom's eyes, is because we're saying we're taking a step back from this world. We're using these tools in order to have some introspection, to understand the physicality, what its proper place is, and when it goes too far, or when we get too swept up in it, and with everything else that goes on Yom Kippur in terms of vidui and in terms of tshuva, etc., etc. So this is part of that package, but we're not afflicting ourselves in a direct way. We're denying ourselves pleasures. Yeah.
Does that mean we shouldn't learn Torah in those days?
So if Torah was a physical pleasure,
No, but this is not wrong.
so maybe the answer would be yes. Oh, it's as a form of avelut, like on Tisha B'Av, for example, and during Shiva, lo aleinu. So Torah is forbidden, right? Because it gives us pleasure, and and we are on those days we don't want simcha, but there's no issur of simcha on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, there's a difference between v'initem and not being happy. Yeah.
When Yom Kippur, with this being not able to do everything, with experience here, and I've been here from the beginning of this Beit Knesset, there's a tremendous power of the singing together and
right.
Ending the day with like this massive climax of one day a year you get away from all this, but there's a spiritual pleasure.
Correct. Absolutely.
It goes
right.
beyond anything, whether you eat
right.
French fries or something like that.
Right. I mean, you couldn't. It depends how good the French fries are.
Yeah,
but you're absolutely
right. It's true.
Right.
It's true. And
right.
people that come also, and they come once a year, not
right.
here, but they also that's what they're now. So are they now not utilizing enough to feel the negative part, or is it something there?
Again, the negative is a denial of pleasure, and it's being it's part of
a physical
of the
pleasure, but there's
right.
a
In other words,
spiritual
that
pleasure.
allows us to catapult us in the other direction. Correct. It's also as part of what we're going to say in the Machzor in terms of if we have Binyan Beit HaMikdash between now and Yom Kippur, what happens in the Avodat Yom Kippurim, right? But we even say at the end of the Avodah, Yom Tov Haya Oseh Kohen Gadol, right? The Kohen Gadol would make a Yom Tov, or Mara Kohen, etc. Right? I always envisioned it as a musical. Right, Ma'areh Kohen, right, and you have all the Leviim going like this and the Kohanim going like that, right? It's like but that's the idea of what is going on in the Mikdash itself, right? The Simcha, and that's part of it, because again, Initem and Shabbaton of Initem is not in conflict with Simcha, right? It's a different theme. There are similarities in, let's say, on Tisha B'Av to Yom Kippur, because we take the model of what is forbidden to us on Yom Kippur and we apply it to Tisha B'Av, but for a completely different purpose. There, the purpose is Avelut. There, the purpose is mourning. Here, the purpose is a spiritual rarefication. Right? But you could use the same tools for completely different goals. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry? Okay, good. Thank you. Right, right. That Mishnah is a very much correct.
It is a Simcha day.
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding us of that source.
Providing the chazan sings in tune.
Okay, Seder. Okay, but then you get the additional hana of laughing at the chazan. Anyway, but that Seder. Let's continue. So what happens if there is when for whatever the reason that aspect of Shabbaton doesn't exist? So here's the example that I want to deal with. Cholesh sha'achal. This is number 6. The Magen Avraham. So let's talk about halacha. Right? Until now, I've spent the first 45 minutes just focusing on, if you will, building the foundations. But now let's try to see some applications of this. So now the following halacha. We'll see the Shulchan Aruch that the Magen Avraham is referring to in a minute. But we'll start with the Magen Avraham. Cholesh sha'achal. Number 6. So, if you have a person who has to eat on Yom Kippur, so uvotzeya al shtei kikarot. So then, should he use lechem mishnah? It's Yom Tov. It's Shabbat. It's I'm not supposed to eat, but now I have to eat, and it's a mitzvah to eat. So, should I treat it as a Yom Tov? V'li nireh. So the Magen Avraham, after quoting this idea, that would say, you have lechem mishnah. She'ein tzarich delo tiknu ken biyom kippurim. If you have to eat, you eat, but you don't have to make as it were, a Yom Tov meal. Umikol shechen l'chol ha'mesukan she'ein dato miyushavet v'gam ein tzarich l'kadesh. And should you make kiddush? Okay, it's Yom Kippur. It's a holy day. I have to eat, so maybe I should make kiddush. So he says no. Why? Kevan shehayom garam lo isur. The day of Yom Kippur is a day of isur when it comes to eating. V'raksha pikuach nefesh gorem lo heter. It's just that you have the heter to eat today because it's life endangering if you don't. V'havei l'didei kechol ein bo lo kiddush v'lo halakos. So it becomes neutral. In other words, the Shabbaton aspect is sort of still there. It's not because if you were to make kiddush, so then it would be violating Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur never has the Shabbaton of Shabbat, the Shabbaton of Yom Tov. That includes kiddush and includes having a festive meal. That's all part of the Shabbaton of that day. Yom Kippur's Shabbaton is v'initem. So now I have a heter of why initem isn't going to apply to me. But now I don't jump in the other direction. I stick to the to Shabbaton. So now Rabbi Akiva Eger, right?
What about
We'll
Yavo?
we'll get to it. So Rabbi Akiva Eger says on this Magen Avraham, he says Aval biyom Kippurim shechal b'Shabbat. What happens is if you have number 7. What happens if Yom Kippur falls out on a Shabbat and you have to eat? Is that the same as Yom Kippur like this year when it falls out on Monday? D'chiyuv alav midoraita l'kadesh. So you just said that Yom Kippur never created a chiyuv to make kiddush. Shabbat does create a chiyuv for kiddush. Yom Kippur blocks Shabbat. Now I removed Yom Kippur because the person has to eat because of pikuach nefesh. So now does Shabbat revert to its full form, and you should make kiddush because it's Shabbat? So he says yes. Ula sovrim shte'en kiddush al makom suda hu d'Rabbanan yesh lomar yatsa yidei chiyuv d'oraita b'azkarat Shabbat b'tfilah im mechavein l'tzeit. So normally speaking, we do make kiddush on, if you will. We say the kiddush is introduced into the tefillah. So that is the deoraita. The eating and the cup of wine is only d'Rabbanan. But then he says it will slip just to the bowl. Masha'en ken b'chal b'Shabbat. Kanat Chazal haya b'chol Shabbat. Tiyeh kiddush b'makom suda. Memela gam Shabbat zo b'chlal. V'zeh choleh chal alav hachiyuv d'Shabbat. So he says, this person who is ill has a chiyuv, and he is now no longer bound by the initem et nafshotechem. So it might be true that there was never a takana to make kiddush on Yom Kippur when Yom Kippur is on a Monday. So you don't make kiddush on Yom Kippur, but there is a din to make kiddush on a Friday night. So if you're eating on Friday night or you're eating Shabbat day, you have to make kiddush. Very simple. Now this is not accepted la halacha. Even though that is the approach of Rabbi Akiva Eger, he says and I'll just take a snippet from tshuva of the third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. But it's applied in the Mishnah Berurah as well. It's accepted against Rabbi Akiva Eger. Number 8. Amra Torah ta'anu et nafshotechem af keshechal b'Shabbat. Im ken bitla Torah mitzvat achilat Shabbat ve'onek Shabbat keshechal bo b'yom HaKippurim im ken ein shum mitzvah. What does he say? So this gets to a very important question. Which is the bigger day? Shabbat or Yom Kippur? Which is the holier day?
Shabbat.
How many people say Shabbat? How many people say Yom Kippur? Shabbaton. But that's also refers to Shabbat itself. Yeah. So the answer is, right? If you, on one level, the answer is that Shabbat is the greater day. Why? So, just you see that in the literature. So in terms of the Kriyat Torah. So on Shabbat we have 7 aliyot. On Yom Kippur we have 6 aliyot. Why the difference? On Yom Tov you have 5 aliyot. Right? So why? So it's a Mishnah in Megillah that explains it. On Yom Tov the Isur Malacha is only a lotas. So that kedusha, which is as opposed to 4 for, let's say, Chol Hamoed Rosh Chodesh, where there's no Isur Malacha at all, but it has the day itself is significant. So we added 1 aliyah. Then comes Yom Tov, Isur Malacha, that's another aliyah. Yom Kippur is a Chiyuv Karet, that's another aliyah. Shabbat and Isur Skila, so that's another aliyah. In other words, Shabbat is a higher level of kedusha. On the other hand, we all know that if Shabbat and Yom Kippur fall out at the same time, you're going to fast, right? You're not going to. So which one wins? So I think the answer is based on the Shabbaton. Shabbaton for Shabbat, and we're going to see an example of this in a moment. Shabbat, for the Shabbaton of Shabbat, is defined primarily by it being a day of rest. So as a result, if you ask, well, which is the holier day in terms of resting, of Kol Melacha Lo Ta'asu, the answer is Shabbat. But there is no mention of eating and drinking. It's expanded into Shabbaton and the oneg that we're all familiar with. But that isn't part and parcel of the day of Shabbat in terms of the way that it's presented in the Torah. So that is the Shabbaton of Yom Kippur, of Initem, takes precedence there. Whereas the two are working, or I wouldn't say complementing one another, but they are the territories that they are focusing on are different territories. So you can have the Initem of Davshotechem of Yom Kippur taking precedence over our normal activities on Shabbat, and at the same time saying Shabbat is the holier day.
And the dominant.
Right.
Shabbat, Yisrael, a lot of things have changed.
Right, okay, yeah.
The word oneg also is nega. So usually the oneg we know from Shabbat, etc. But then when Yom Kippur, there's what the whole is about.
Okay, I hadn't thought of that.
A nega part to it.
Uh-huh. Okay, maybe.
It's probably the same word. In other words, it's
right. Playing on the letters, yeah.
New idea.
Right. So what is getting back to the Tzemach Tzedek here, getting back to that source number 8. What's he saying? What's he arguing with Rabbi Akiva about? Rabbi Akiva Eger. See, Rabbi Akiva Eger is looking at it from the individual perspective. He's saying, okay, it's now Friday night, and it's also Yom Kippur night. And so for me, what do I have? I have Yom Kippur on my list, and I have Shabbos on my list. Right? Maybe not in that order. Right? Shabbos and Yom Kippur, fine. But now, I don't have Yom Kippur because of medical reasons I have to eat. I still have Shabbos. So I go and I have to now, so now I have to make Kiddush. Right? That's what Rabbi Akiva says. Someone says, no, you missed it. You missed the point. The V'initem v'nafshotechem, the Shabbaton of Yom Kippur, isn't for you personally. It is affecting the nature of the day as a whole. Right? Yom Kippur isn't different for me than for you. You have the chiyuv to fast. I don't have the chiyuv to fast. Is our Yom Kippur essentially different? So Rabbi Akiva Eger would say, yes, it's essentially different because you don't have the chiyuv to fast, or I don't have the chiyuv to fast, right? And you do, so it's essentially different. And the Tzemach says, no, Yom Kippur is always the same for every person, whether they're fasting or not. It's a day of Innui, Shabbaton, and that Innui cancels Kiddush. There was never a takana of Kiddush on Shabbat that falls on Yom Kippur. Because by definition, it's a day of Innui. So therefore, that component of Shabbat is canceled out. Right? That is the way that we're looking at it from the perspective of the day as a whole. Right? Another example. Right? Let's take a look.
Question on that one, though.
What?
Isn't Kiddush the matir to eat, or are you saying that you have a head there?
So Kiddush itself, the notion of Kiddush itself, is it doesn't require eating, doesn't require a cup of wine. You're Yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush, of, let's say, Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, which is the mitzvah of Kiddush. You're Yotzei when you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Yeah.
Right? You're Yotzei that.
Yeah.
And especially if you say what's behind it. Right? So that leads to all sorts of questions. A person who davens Arvit, so he's been Yotzei the mitzvah, and he comes home, and there's people who haven't davened Ma'ariv, and they have a chiyuv d'oraita. How are this person being Motzi, those people who have a chiyuv d'oraita? Okay? But the question only pops up because the core din of Kiddush doesn't require the wine. Right? But But again, Rabbi Akiva would say that doesn't matter because I'm looking at the individual. The individual, the same way that he has a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Kiddush every Friday night, he has a mitzvah d'Rabbanan on this Friday night, unless he can't because it's asur to eat. Right? So that's the different way of approach.
He still has to make a bracha.
So let's talk about that. Thank you. Number 10. Cholesh she'achal. Shulchan Aruch, this is what the Magen Avraham had started with. Cholesh she'achal b'yom kippur v'yashev ito b'inyan she'echol levarech. Tzarich la'askir shel yom ha'kippurim b'birkat hamazon she'omer ya'aleh v'yavo b'bonei Yerushalayim. The classic case that the Gemara deals with, and that's what the Mechaber is working off, is that a person who is not only physically ill, but as a result, he has his mental state doesn't allow him to really be able to even make a bracha. He's just totally out of it. And then we feed that person, and until he is able to nityashev da'ato, until his mind is put at ease. Right? Person, let's say he faints, and you go right away and you start giving him some water. So you're not going to say bracha first, right? Right, and then we'll give you the water. Right, you drink the water, and then he recovers somewhat, and now so he says, okay, that person has to bench, and when you bench, tzarich la'askir shel yom kippur b'birkat hamazon. So you say ya'aleh v'yavo. Whereas if a person that has to eat on Yom Kippur, the Shulchan Aruch Paskin, this is based on earlier sources, the Tur, the Rush, you say ya'aleh v'yavo. The Magen Avraham, remember, this was the Magen Avraham who said you don't make Kiddush. So I broke up the Magen Avraham. On that point, after he said you don't make Kiddush, he continues, V'lo haskara b'birkat hamazon. This is source number 11 now. This is just the continuation of the Magen Avraham of number 7. Lo haskara b'birkat hamazon v'afilu ratza lahaskir eino maskir. Right? The Magen Avraham disagrees. And he says, no. The whole point of Ya'aleh v'yavo is because there was a mitzvah to eat today. There isn't a mitzvah to eat. You just have to eat. So you shouldn't say Ya'aleh v'yavo. Delo eshkarachan haskara b'birkat hamazon makom sheyesh mitzvah ba'achilato. Miu ein lahakel keven shatur machmir. Right? The Magen Avraham said, if you would ask me the question, I would have told you, don't say Ya'aleh v'yavo. But since there is already this tradition going back at least to the Tur, that's in the beginning of the 13th century, or the end of the 13th century, excuse me, and his father, the Rush, who say it probably predates them as well, that you should say Ya'aleh v'yavo. I'm not going to tell you don't say Ya'aleh v'yavo if you want to, but I think that in principle you don't have to. But al kol panim ein tzarich lekadesh diyesh lachush lebracha levatala. Because now I'm balancing different things. If I'm just saying Ya'aleh v'yavo, what have I done? So is there any downside to saying Ya'aleh v'yavo? So he says there's no real downside to it. It's not necessary, in my opinion. But if you said it, okay, so you said b'yom ha'kippurim hazeh. Right? You're going to say Ya'aleh v'yavo as part of tefillah also. Right? You just introduced it into your birkat hamazon. Mishkafel. Right, that's the, but saying Ya'aleh v'yavo. But to say Kiddush, there you have to make a bracha. You have to say Shem Hashem. That's asur. That's a bracha levatala. So you shouldn't do it. Right? So if it was Shabbat, you'd say Ritzei as well. Correct. And this is the this is the psak of the Mishnah Brura as well. That so that you should say Ya'aleh v'yavo, but mainly because there isn't a downside to it. But when it comes to where there is a problem in terms of Kiddush, that you do have a problem. What about making a zimun? Let's say I have 3 people, right, who have to eat. It's Yom Kippur, right? Three sick guys, yeah, right? And you're sitting down, and now, okay, we have to bench. Ya'aleh v'yavo, should make a zimun, right?
That makes it communal.
What?
That makes it communal, but it really shouldn't be.
But why not? No, I have my heter, you have your heter, he has his heter, right? We're in the, God forbid, we're all in the hospital together, and okay, so So,
That's wrong.
so you should make a zimun. So this is already dealt with, interestingly enough, already in the also the 13th century by the Rashba. Number 14. Cholesh tzarich lechol b'yom Kippur. So his question is: Im mevarech hamotzi birkat hamazon imlav. Do you make the brachot? Why shouldn't you make brachot as a whole? Because the halacha is a question: if I do something which is forbidden, I eat a cheeseburger. Should I make a bracha on a cheeseburger? Right? Right? So,
The doctor orders you to eat the
okay, a doctor, even without a doctor ordering, I want to do, I just have this hankering for a cheeseburger. Right? But I also recognize that, that it came from God. Right? I'm a religious person who either at a moment of weakness or perhaps I have my doubts as to whether God really cares if I eat cheeseburger. The idea, God cares more about what comes out of my mouth than what goes into my mouth, or something along those lines. People like that. But I recognize that the core idea of brachot, that everything comes from God. Right? So should I make a bracha or not?
in English.
By the way, this comes up halacha l'maaseh for people who are, let's say, who are balei tshuva, who are going step by step in that path, and they say, okay, I want a bench, but they haven't reached the point where they are willing to be scrupulous about kashrut.
What do they do with
Should they make a bracha or not?
What do they do with the treifa banquet in Cincinnati?
I'm sorry?
What do they do with the treifa banquet in Cincinnati?
I don't know. I don't know.
These brachot are because of that.
So those are birkat hanen.
Yom Kippur is a Yom Innui.
So they have Innui. So it should perhaps it goes against it. The Rashba is this is a machloket. The Rambam says that if you eat something which is forbidden,
No.
right, you don't make a bracha. It's based on a Gemara. The Gemara says, the Gemara actually asks the question with regard to zimun. This is why it's machloket rishon. The Gemara asks with regard to making a zimun if we're eating non-kosher food together. Right, and but we have let's say the bread is tevel. So it was the trumot weren't taken. So we're eating this bread and we're breaking bread together. So we're breaking halacha and bread together. So should we make a zimun? So the Gemara and the Mishnah say no, you can't make a zimun. Right, for that. So the Rambam takes that Gemara one step further and says, so you can't make a bracha. Because you're making a mockery. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, we're using the drasha and the pasuk, Botzei birech ni'etz Hashem. The person who does who violates the law and makes a bracha, so that is an abomination to God. Right? You're making a mockery. You're saying, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam motzi lechem min haaretz. Right? And you're eating treif bread. Right? So how can you say that? Right? That's what the Rambam says. The Ravid disagrees, and the Rashba basically follows the Ravid, and says, no, you can't join together. We can't join as a group and say, right, that Rabotai nevarech. Let's make a blessing together. Yehi Shem Hashem mevorach me'atav yad olam. Right, when we gather together in doing something which is forbidden, but if I say the idea of the birkat hanenim, that I'm allowing myself, I'm saying this belongs to God and now I'm ingesting it, and I recognize that, so then of course you have to make a bracha. That's the Ravid and the Rashba. Okay? So the Rashba says that he applies it to to Yom Kippur as well. And says, of course, you should make a bracha. However, what about so we say yes, you make brachot and you say birkat hamazon. But what about the zimun? So here, this isn't directly dealt with. Interestingly enough, to the best of my knowledge, until the 20th century. So here, if you take a look at number 15, Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata. So it brings different dayot. We'll just go to the middle. Mehagaon, right after the three dots. Mehagaon Rav Shlomo Zalman Orbach Zatzal Shamati D'yesh listapek the whole Torah Amra v'initem. The Torah tells us the core of the day, is to deny. But what can you do? These are people who have a heter to eat, a chiyuv to eat, but nevertheless it's in contradiction to the nature of the day. So this notion that we are gathering as a group activity, right? That can't be done, right? It's not. It's something which we can gather together all we want, but the idea of the initem as a concept of the day blocks it. Okay, this is the
The zimun is what he's talking about.
right with regard to zimun. Not with regard to benching. Right. Everyone agrees that you should make bracha rishona. Everyone agrees that you should bake a birkat hamazon. There's that question: should you say ya'aleh v'yavo b'yom kippurim hazeh? The halacha, the accepted halacha, is that yes, you do. You should say that. As I said, as though we saw people who have reservations about that. Magen Avraham, for example, has reservations about doing that. When it comes to kiddush, the accepted psak halacha is no kiddush, even if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat. Right? There shouldn't be a kiddush. Because again, it's because of the nature of the day. I have 3 minutes left, so let me just finish. I'll be happy afterwards to take any questions. So now, what about when, if you will, Yom Kippur and Shabbat come into clash? Okay, so here is the Gemara deals with it. This isn't so much accepted. I have that number. Which one should I do? Okay, you know what? I'm going to leave that aside because we've talked about one aspect of the clash. One new halacha, number 18. Forgot about number 18. This is the question. Let's say you have a person who, and this is it has different ramifications. Should let's say a bar mitzvah boy, bat mitzvah girl, who becomes bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah on Yom Kippur. Right? Now, there is a question in the poskim. If a person becomes a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, from exactly at the moment, right, of their 13 years after their birth, 12 years after their birth, or it's a little bit less than 13 years, a little bit less than the beginning of the day, right? So generally speaking, we follow the opinion that it says that it becomes from the beginning of the day and not in the middle of the day. But on Yom Kippur it might be different because the Torah talks about be'etzem hayom hazeh, on in the middle of the day. So a person was born on Yom Kippur and now becomes bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah on Yom Kippur itself. Should they fast? Why? Because they missed half of the fast when they weren't a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. I mean, we'll tell them to fast, but do they have to? Right? They're going to say, I missed half of it. A person who is now, another example, a person who has to eat because they're ill. And now do you continue eating? Right? You don't have to eat anymore. You've had enough, and you have a situation. Person has to eat. It could be more than the shiur, etc. Right? But you now have to. Okay, you had lunch, and you can manage until after the tzom is over. Right? So, are you allowed to eat? Or once you've said, well, I've already broken Yom Kippur, so I can eat in the afternoon? Or do you say, no, you don't have to eat anymore? Right? You were allowed to eat, and if you feel that you need to eat again, you will allow it. But if you don't feel that you need to eat, then you shouldn't eat. Right? Is that there at all? So this is the question that was posed to Rav Tzvi Pasach Frank. And he quotes a tshuva who says, Im na'aseh gadol, this is in the bold, Im na'aseh gadol be'emtzi yom ha'kippurim, nira lefi ha'ne'adati, kem d'rishai lechol miktzat hayom, ein katanit me'erev ad erev. The whole concept of v'initem b'nafsotechem is from the beginning of the day till the end of the day. I don't have the beginning of the day till the end of the day כיוון שכבר אכל ושתה היום, איך ייתכן שבאמצע היום כשנעשה גדול יתחיל להתענות? הרי אין כאן תענית כלל. תענית בעידן שיהיה מעת לעת עד כאן לשונו. So the first approach, the Yeshua Yaakov, which was one of the leading poskim in Poland in the 19th century. So he says, okay, this is what can you do? We're going to tell the kid, most likely, continue, we told him because of chinuch to fast at the beginning of the day anyway. He's going to continue to fast. But does he have a chiyuv to fast? The answer is no. And you could apply this to a person who has to eat as well. If you don't have the full 24 hours, 25 hours, whatever it is, so you don't have the concept of v'initem. That's the first one. He says, but the Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank disagrees. Hinei ma de pshita le'lashot Yaakov de'al pachot me'ed le'ed lo chal chovat Yom Kippurim lo mashma ken. So Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank disagrees. He says, Yeshua Yaakov says this is pashut. But no, I don't think it's so pashut at all. I think he's wrong. Da'af al div d'chtiv me'erev v'erev da'hainu d'chol ha'sha'ot ha'me'ed le'ed hukam b'ay b'chiyuva shel tanu nafshotechem. All it means is that if you want to ask me, when is this notion of v'initem, ta'anu et nafshotechem, the idea of Shabbaton, of initem, when does it apply? It applies every moment of Yom Kippur, from the beginning until the end. But if the mitzvah zo mitchadeshet b'chol rega b'fnei atzma. This goes back to what I was saying before, the approach against Rabbi Akiva Hager. The Yeshua Yaakov is taking what I think is along the lines of Rabbi Akiva Hager said. He was saying, for me personally, is it a day of affliction? The answer is no. Why? Because I'm eating. And so therefore, Kiddush applies. Rabbi Yeshua Yaakov says, okay, I've eaten today. And, how much affliction is it, right, to wait, right, if I had to eat and now it's lunchtime, how much affliction until the end of the day? How much affliction is it if I had to eat at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right before Nila? Right? Okay, another 2 hours. That's not affliction. Right? It's just the gap between, meal times in the hospital. So that doesn't apply anymore. So you've lost it. It's not your fault, but you can eat. The Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank says no. The concept v'nitem and nafshotechem goes to the very nature of the day. Since it goes to the very nature of the day, so as long as you don't have to eat, you shouldn't eat. Right? And it's not just simply because you don't feel right eating. Right? Because if you're in a situation where you have to eat and it's Yom Kippur, we don't feel comfortable with it, even though we know halachically we have to, and we do it because that's halachically what we're supposed to do. But you still don't feel comfortable doing it. Because Yom Kippur, he says, no, it's not just that you don't feel comfortable, it's that when you can fast, even if it's just for a minute, you're being mekayim the general idea of v'initem and nafshotechem that everyone is involved with. It's the day of Shabbaton.
Actually, I think the last 2 lines that you don't have underlined is the first one. It says it.
Right. Right. Umehai time. So he talks about it with regard. Umehai time gam cholesh tzarich leachol tzarich sheyeda b'chol achila v'achila sheochel b'shvil sakanat nafsho v'chol shah she'en zakuk la'achila ahadre kra le'isuro. Right. Right. So that's exactly what he said. Correct. So that is the idea. So just to, now that I've gone over time, I apologize, but that is, it's a din of Tosefet Yom Kippurim. So this idea that basically this is what, again, it's not just simply that we're supposed to fast on Yom Kippur. The idea of V'initem Nafshotechem defines Yom Kippur. That is the Shabbaton, the same way that the Yisur Melachah defines Yom Kippur, it defines Shabbat, it defines Yom Tov. Each day is separate, right? Each day has its own motif. And if we had a little more time, we'd describe the difference, let's say the difference Malacha on Shabbat as opposed to the difference Malacha of Yom Kippur. We don't have the time. But but this larger concept of Shabbaton is what is defining the nature of the day. And for Yom Kippur, it is V'initem, and we should all be Zocha to be Mekayim, the Shabbaton of Yom Kippur, each person in their own way, and that our tefillot should be accepted l'tova.
Amen.
I do.
I'm sorry?